Meadowfield Ridge was the kind of suburban neighborhood that appeared in glossy real estate ads. Immaculate lawns sprawled beneath evenly spaced streetlights. Houses glowed with fresh paint, and identical mailboxes bore discreet house numbers. Flower beds brimming with begonias framed sidewalks where neighbors waved politely at each other. Driving down Oak Blossom Lane or Magnolia Way, newcomers might think they'd discovered paradise. Yet beneath that pristine exterior lurked tensions orchestrated by the Meadowfield Ridge Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA had standard rules about fence height, mailbox design, and permissible paint colors, but over the last couple of years, an individual rose to wield those guidelines like personal weapons. Bernice Allwood, a middle-aged woman known, often mockingly, as Karen. Karen's official title within the HOA was Compliance Representative. Unofficially, she was the judge, jury, and executioner for every perceived violation. Whether you left your trash bin at the curb a bit too long or planted daisies instead of the approved hydrangeas, you'd receive a stern note taped to your door. Most people quietly complied, intimidated by her fervor and anxious to keep peace. A few tried arguing, but got nowhere. Karen was a brick wall of self-righteousness, convinced she acted solely for the neighborhood's best interests. As neighbors soon discovered, once Karen set her sights on you, no aspect of your private life would remain untouched. She had an uncanny ability to barge in unannounced or deliver typed letters in the dead of night. And though she had been resented for some time, no single act stirred the neighborhood's collective fury like the day she literally threw someone's crockery out a window, labeling the homeowner a clumsy hoarder. This is the story of that outrageous moment, and how it transformed Meadowfield Ridge from a place plagued by fear into one bound by solidarity. Evelyn Mitchell, a 73-year-old widow, had lived in Meadowfield Ridge for almost 20 years, dating back to a time when the community felt less regimented. Evelyn had a gentle smile, white hair swept into a loose bun, and a penchant for wearing floral print blouses. Her house was a single-story home on Rosemary Drive, with a neat garden of roses out front. She was known for waving at passers-by from her porch rocker. A retired nurse, Evelyn had collected plates, bowls, and decorative crockery over her decades of traveling. She wasn't a hoarder in any pathological sense. Rather, she enjoyed rummaging through flea markets, antique shops, and yard sales during her younger days, collecting items with interesting stories. Having outlived her husband by 10 years, she found a certain comfort in these objects. They connected her to memories of him and their shared adventures. Yet, as she aged, Evelyn recognized she had more items than she needed. She decided it was time to downsize and perhaps make a little extra money for household repairs. The roof needed maintenance, and she'd recently learned she might need a new water heater. Her plan: host a small yard sale on a weekend, focusing on the crockery, plus a handful of knickknacks. A modest event, to be sure. She had no intention of turning it into a spectacle. Little did she know that Karen would soon swoop in, outraged by the prospect of a yard sale that might, in her eyes, clutter up the neighborhood with junk. 2 weeks before Evelyn's scheduled yard sale, she drove around posting small flyers on community boards in local grocery stores and passing them to friends. Nothing too flashy, just a note. Yard sale at 218 Rosemary Drive, Sat and Sunday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Vintage plates, bowls, home goods. Karen spotted a flyer on a bulletin board at the neighborhood's clubhouse. Immediately, a frown etched across her face. She recognized Evelyn's address. Although Karen didn't normally lurk at yard sales, her knee-jerk reaction was that this might be a violation of HOA policy. She believed yard sales, especially those involving old junk, degraded property values. The official guidelines allowed them, provided they were not excessive or disruptive, but Karen believed any such gathering was an invitation for chaos. That evening, Karen drafted a carefully worded email to the HOA board members, using phrases like concerns about large-scale rummage events, potential for traffic congestion, and uncertainty about compliance with city ordinances. She attached a scanned copy of Evelyn's flyer and pressed send. She expected swift condemnation. However, The board president, Mr. Morales, replied that yard sales were permissible up to 4 times a year, so long as the property owner managed parking responsibly and ended by dusk. No violation was apparent. Karen bristled at the nonchalant response. She typed back a curt note. "We must remain vigilant. I will visit Ms. Mitchell personally to ensure compliance." Mr. Morales did not respond. Karen's frustration simmered. She decided that if no one else from the board would oppose Evelyn's yard sale, she'd have to handle it herself. Meanwhile, Evelyn pressed on with her yard sale plans, oblivious to Karen's disapproval. She stored her boxes of crockery in the spare bedroom closest to the front of the house, carefully dividing items by category: china plates with floral motifs, vintage bowls from the 1950s, handmade clay mugs from an artisan trip. Some sets were chipped or heavily used, but she figured there might be a market for them among thrifty neighbors. Others were in near-perfect condition. She dusted each piece, making sure to wipe away any grime from years of storage. The process was both physical and emotional labor. Each item sparked a memory, like the porcelain dessert plates from that trip to Vermont with her late husband, or the ornate serving bowl they'd used every Thanksgiving for cranberry sauce. Still, she felt a sense of relief as she organized everything. Letting go of these objects would free up space in her home and in her mind. That weekend, neighbors saw her watering her roses, humming contentedly. A few recognized she was preparing for the sale. Some, especially the older residents, looked forward to rummaging through her vintage finds. Karen, however, did not. She walked by Evelyn's driveway several times that week, noticing the stacked boxes through an open curtain. Each time, the disapproval grew. A few days before the sale, Karen arrived uninvited at Evelyn's doorstep, wearing a prim blazer despite the summer heat. Evelyn answered the door with a curious smile. "Why, hello," she greeted gently, recognizing Karen from HOA gatherings. Karen gave a stiff nod. "Ms. Mitchell, I see you're hosting a yard sale this weekend. Do you have the proper signage ready? Are you aware of the HOA regulations regarding display items, hours of operation, and noise control?" Evelyn blinked. "I read the general guidelines. I'm allowed a yard sale, yes?" Karen stepped forward, peering into the hallway. She spotted boxes of crockery near the spare room. "Yes, but we have strict rules about signage. Only one sign is permitted on your lawn, none on the main road. Also, the HOA mandates that leftover items should not remain visible after the sale is concluded each day. Have you arranged for that?" Evelyn nodded, a bit flustered. "I plan to bring unsold boxes back inside at the end of each day. Is that acceptable?" Karen pursed her lips, scanning the boxes. "Fine. Just be sure not to create any sidewalk obstructions. And keep the volume down. No loud haggling or crowds that block the street." Evelyn gave a polite chuckle, though her eyebrows creased. "I don't expect more than a handful of people." Karen surveyed her from head to toe, then gave a curt nod. "We'll be watching," she said, and with that ominous statement, she turned and left. Evelyn stood on her doorstep, unsettled, but resolved to continue with her modest plan. Saturday morning arrived bright and early. Evelyn placed a simple sign on her lawn that read, "Yard sale, vintage crockery, and more," with an arrow pointing toward her driveway. She organized a few folding tables, carefully laying out plates, bowls, cups, and figurines. She taped small price tags to each item, most items priced between 50 cents and a few dollars for sets. Before long, a trickle of visitors appeared, mostly other seniors from the neighborhood who enjoyed browsing. Some recognized certain pieces as reminiscent of their childhood or parents' era. "I used to have a bowl just like this," one woman exclaimed, holding a dainty pink rose-patterned dish. Evelyn's face lit up with delight. She chatted warmly, sharing anecdotes about certain plates, where she found them, or how old they might be. A few passers-by merely glanced and moved on, but by mid-morning, Evelyn had sold enough to be pleased. She sat on a folding chair, sipping iced tea, feeling the satisfaction of a small success. In the background, neighbors saw Karen's distinctive figure prowling the street, phone in hand. She snapped photos from a distance, no doubt documenting crowd size or the arrangement of items. Some suspected she was searching for a reason to shut the sale down. Yet no rule was being broken. There was no blocking of sidewalks or noise disturbance. Despite Karen's watchful presence, the first day of a yard sale wrapped up peacefully. Evelyn brought the unsold items indoors around 2 p.m., then spent the afternoon resting, content that her event hadn't caused any trouble. Sunday morning saw a slightly bigger turnout. Word had spread among local bargain hunters that someone was selling vintage crockery. A few out-of-neighborhood shoppers trickled in, possibly from an online post a friend had shared. Evelyn welcomed them with the same gentleness, not minding the extra foot traffic. Several neighbors dropped by again, bringing acquaintances. Karen's frustration rose. She stood across the street, arms folded, watching a small cluster of people gather around Evelyn's tables. In Karen's mind, this was a large rummage event, exactly as she'd warned the board. She approached Evelyn's property line, scanning for violations. Any litter, any illegal sign, any sign of junk left in plain sight. She zeroed in on a group of folks rummaging through boxes on a driveway. The boxes weren't obstructing traffic, but in Karen's eyes, the sight of rummaging was unsightly and degrading the neighborhood ambience. She marched over, ignoring stares from prospective buyers. "Ms. Mitchell," Karen said in a frosty tone, "it's nearly 2 p.m. Isn't it time to pack up? We don't want this sale to drag on all afternoon." She pointed at a line in the HOA guidelines that said yard sales should typically end by mid-afternoon unless otherwise approved. Evelyn looked at her watch. "It's only 1:40, Ms. Allwood. I intended to close up soon." Karen pressed her lips into a rigid line, but didn't argue. She lingered there until some of the visitors felt uncomfortable and left, which upset Evelyn. Eventually, Karen left as well, but not before giving Evelyn a final glare. The second day ended quietly enough. No formal complaint had materialized. However, the seeds of confrontation were firmly planted in Karen's mind. By late Sunday afternoon, Evelyn had made modest earnings, enough to buy some groceries and set aside a little for her roof repair fund. Yet she realized she still had many unsold dishes and bowls. Several neighbors encouraged her to hold another sale in a week or two, or even try an online marketplace. Evelyn felt unsure. She worried about aggravating Karen further. That evening, Karen sent an email to the entire HOA board, labeling Evelyn's yard sale a multi-day rummage operation that encouraged strangers to wander the streets. She attached photos of license plates from cars she didn't recognize, implying a security risk. Though there was no real evidence of wrongdoing, her stern language created a sense of alarm. Mr. Morales, the HOA president, responded politely that yard sales were allowed up to 4 times a year, and Evelyn's event did not violate that frequency. As for security risks, the HOA had no record of complaint from neighbors or city officials. He concluded with a hint that the board would not be taking action. Karen fumed. She decided if the board wouldn't back her, she'd have to find another angle. She recalled seeing multiple boxes inside Evelyn's spare bedroom, more crockery than what was displayed. Karen hypothesized Evelyn might plan a hoarder-style sale or clutter up the neighborhood with repeated events. She believed, falsely, that Evelyn was a pack rat who might let the neighborhood degrade into a permanent flea market. Her anger grew into an irrational vendetta. Over the next week, Evelyn considered how best to offload the remaining crockery. She spoke with a niece who suggested an online approach or consignment, but those options felt overwhelming. Another neighbor, Harriet, recommended continuing the yard sale the coming Saturday, seeing as many folks might have missed the first weekend. Harriet even offered to bring some of her own and used home goods for a mini joint sale. They figured 2 or 3 families participating might attract more buyers and help them all. It was a harmless plan, not unusual in suburban communities where multifamily yard sales often draw better crowds. Evelyn decided on a one-day sale. "I'll do it from 8 to noon," she said, wanting to wrap up early to avoid the scorching afternoon sun. Harriet nodded, excited to join. They printed a few more flyers, posted them around, and spread the news among friends. Unfortunately, word reached Karen almost immediately. On Thursday evening, just 2 days before the planned sale, Evelyn was tidying her kitchen when she heard an urgent knock at her front door. She opened it to find Karen, again uninvited, her complexion flushed with annoyance. "You're holding another sale?" Karen demanded, skipping pleasantries. "I saw Harriet's flyer at the coffee shop. This is becoming a weekly flea market, Ms. Mitchell." "It's just one more day," Evelyn replied, confused and slightly intimidated. "I still have items left. Harriet has a few things, too, and we'll finish by noon." Karen narrowed her eyes. The HOA guidelines limit yard sales to 4 per year, but 2 back-to-back weekends is excessive. You're turning the neighborhood into a junk bazaar. Evelyn's cheeks reddened. She tried to remain calm. "It's only the second time, Ms. Allwood. The first was last weekend. This will be the second. That's well within our limit." Karen pointed an accusatory finger. "But the scale of these events, and the leftover boxes I see stacked in your home, indicates a persistent pattern. You may be a hoarder, Ms. Mitchell, cluttering your property with unsightly items. That can affect property values for everyone." At the word hoarder, Evelyn bristled. "Excuse me," she said, voice shaking. "I'm not hoarding anything. These items are clean and well kept. I'm simply downsizing." Karen snorted. "Then you should do it quietly, not impose on the entire community with an endless rummage. I'll be speaking to the board again. If they won't handle this, I will." With that ominous remark, she turned on her heel and left. Evelyn closed the door, heart pounding. Never had she been so rudely insulted in her own home. Yet she resolved not to be bullied. The yard sale would go on as planned. She had every right under the rules. Karen spent Friday fuming. She found no official avenue to shut down the upcoming sale. Mr. Morales reiterated that Evelyn was within her rights. The city permitted yard sales up to 4 times a year without special permits, as long as they were daytime only and didn't block public roads. Denied institutional backing, Karen's frustration spiraled into anger. She felt overshadowed, ridiculed, made powerless by an elderly woman selling crockery. That evening, Karen paced in her immaculate living room, glaring at a folder stuffed with HOA guidelines. "She's bringing junk into our neighborhood," Karen muttered under her breath. "If the board won't do something, I will." Her eyes flicked to the upper floor of Evelyn's home, visible across the street from her vantage point. She recalled seeing boxes stacked near a window in Evelyn's spare bedroom. In a moment of twisted logic, Karen formed a plan. If Evelyn refused to stop the sale, then perhaps the crockery itself could be forcibly removed from the equation. Such a notion seemed absurd and criminal, but Karen rationalized it as saving the neighborhood from hoarders' junk. She convinced herself Evelyn's rummage sale was a scourge on property values. That action needed to be taken swiftly. With her mind teetering on a warped sense of self-justification, Karen plotted to sabotage the next day's sale in the most direct way she could imagine. Saturday dawned sunny and mild, ideal conditions for a yard sale. Harriet arrived at 7 a.m. to help Evelyn arrange items on folding tables. Harriet contributed some old DVDs, a lamp, and a few kitchen gadgets, which she placed in a corner of the driveway. Evelyn displayed her plates, bowls, cups, and a handful of decorative figurines. Boxes of backup items waited inside, stacked by a large window in the spare bedroom. By 8 a.m., a small crowd gathered. Friendly faces, curious browsers, and a couple of yard sale enthusiasts who roamed the suburbs each weekend. Laughter, conversation, and the gentle clinking of crockery filled the air. Karen watched from across the street, arms folded. She noticed that every time Evelyn sold a plate or bowl, she would step inside the house to restock from those upstairs boxes. Karen decided the best way to kill the sale was to destroy that supply. Without the merchandise, the sale would fizzle. She waited until around 9:30 a.m. when a larger cluster of shoppers assembled in the driveway, and Harriet was busy chatting with someone. Evelyn disappeared into the house to fetch another set of plates. This was Karen's moment. Inside, Evelyn had just entered her spare bedroom when she heard the front door creak. She assumed Harriet had come in for something, so she didn't call out. She knelt by a box of fragile porcelain plates, choosing which ones to bring outside next. Then a sudden burst of movement made her look up. Karen stood in the doorway, face set in grim determination. Before Evelyn could react, Karen pushed past her, grabbed one of the boxes of crockery, and hoisted it up. "What are you doing?" Evelyn cried, alarmed. "You can't just come in here. That's my property." Ignoring Evelyn's words, Karen marched toward the window. She yanked it open, fortunately, a large window with a wide sill. Evelyn tried to grab Karen's arm, but Karen shrugged her off with surprising force. Then, in a swift motion, Karen threw the entire box of plates out the window. Ceramic shards clattered onto the pavement below, shattering in an echoing crash. Several nearby shoppers, hearing the commotion, jumped back in alarm. Harriet, glancing up, gasped as she saw the box's contents raining down in a cascade of splintered crockery. A hush fell over the yard as people realized what had just happened. Upstairs, Evelyn stood stunned. Karen's chest heaved with adrenaline, eyes wild. She hissed, "You're hoarding junk that's a danger to property values. I'm stopping you from burying us in clutter." Evelyn's voice trembled. "How dare you come into my home and throw my belongings? You're trespassing. This is vandalism." Karen showed no remorse. "You brought this on yourself, Ms. Mitchell. No more rummage. No more junk. It ends now." She turned to grab another box, but Evelyn, summoning her courage, stepped in front of it, arms outstretched. Downstairs, Harriet and a couple of neighbors rushed inside to see what was happening. They found Karen and Evelyn in a standoff. "Get out of my house," Evelyn cried, voice shaking with anger. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police." Karen's face reflected a flicker of uncertainty. She glanced at Harriet, whose phone was already in hand, presumably dialing 911. Anxious, Karen released her grip on the box, spun around, and fled down the hallway. Moments later, the front door slammed behind her. Evelyn collapsed onto a nearby chair, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Her precious items, collected over decades, now lay in shards on the pavement. Outside, a small crowd formed around the shattered plates. Some pieces were well beyond salvage, but a few large chunks revealed once beautiful floral designs. Harriet, finishing her phone call, announced that the police were on their way. Furious whispers spread among the onlookers. Karen just threw Ms. Mitchell's plates out the window. Evelyn emerged, visibly shaken. She sank to her knees, sifting through the broken crockery. Her neighbors gently helped gather the fragments. She felt heartbreak mingled with shock. Some plates were old heirlooms or souvenirs. Even though she'd intended to sell them, they still held sentimental or financial value. Toby, Harriet's teenage son, offered to help pick up the pieces, his eyes wide. "Are you okay, Ms. Mitchell? Should you rest?" Evelyn nodded numbly. I'll be fine. Just can't believe she did this." Moments later, a police cruiser arrived. Two officers stepped out, approached Evelyn, and asked questions. She recounted the incident through trembling lips, how Karen barged in, grabbed a box, and hurled it out the window. Harriet confirmed the story, having witnessed part of the scuffle upstairs. The cluster of neighbors offered to give statements, describing the crash and Karen fleeing. As the officers jotted notes, a hush fell. No one had expected such extreme aggression in a typically calm suburban street. Karen was nowhere to be seen. Her house curtains were drawn. The scene of destruction, shards glinting in the sun, contrasted harshly with the usual serenity of Meadowfield Ridge. The officers tried knocking on Karen's door, but received no answer. They spoke with a few onlookers, including Mr. Johnson, who'd glimpsed Karen running around the side of the house moments after the incident. By that point, she'd seemingly locked herself inside, refusing to respond. One officer informed Evelyn that she could press charges for trespassing and property damage if she wished. Evelyn, still in shock, asked for time to think it over. The officer left his card, stating that they'd be in touch, and encouraged her to file a formal report at the station if she wanted to pursue legal action. Word spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Some residents were livid, demanding Karen face immediate consequences. Others were stunned into silence, never expecting the HOA's compliance representative to commit such a brazen act. A rumor circulated that Karen might attempt to defend her actions as protecting the neighborhood, but that only fueled further outrage. Meanwhile, Evelyn's yard sale, once so promising, lay in disarray. Broken plates littered the pavement. Harriet helped her gather the few salvageable pieces. Shoppers drifted away, unsettled by the chaos. Once the shock wore off, neighbors rallied around Evelyn. They visited her home with flowers, cards, and offers to help clean up. Some brought containers of soup or casseroles, as if she'd suffered a personal tragedy. In many ways, she had. Her sense of security and her cherished items were shattered in one unhinged moment. Harriet coordinated a group to repair the damage. Toby and some local teens swept up shard from the driveway, while others mended the window screen that Karen had torn in her haste to open it fully. Martin from down the street used a shop vacuum to ensure no dangerous fragments remained. Through these small gestures, the community expressed its solidarity. People quietly urged Evelyn to file charges. She was conflicted. Part of her felt Karen's behavior was criminal and demanded accountability. Another part hated the thought of a prolonged legal battle. In her heart, she just wanted to move on, reclaim peace, and recoup some of her losses. As these discussions percolated, Harriet pitched a bold idea. Why not turn your yard sale into something bigger? Invite the whole neighborhood to sell or swap items. We could do it every weekend if we like. Turn it into a community flea market of sorts. Evelyn blinked, initially resistant. Karen despises yard sales. She'd be furious. Harriet's eyes hardened. I'm furious at her. She had no right. If we all band together, Karen can intimidate the entire neighborhood. And maybe you can recoup the value of your broken items if more shoppers come. This notion sparked a wave of excitement among neighbors. What if they stood up to Karen, not with aggression, but with communal unity? Over the next few days, Harriet's idea gained traction. She and Martin arranged a meeting of interested neighbors in Evelyn's living room. About 15 people showed up, including some younger families, seniors, and single professionals. They discussed how a weekly or bi-weekly flea market could benefit everyone. Folks could sell gently used clothes, books, crafts, and leftover household goods, or even produce from backyard gardens. Crucially, such a regular event might help Evelyn recover financially from the damage Karen caused. As Harriet put it, if we hold an event that draws a crowd each week, you'll have more chances to sell your remaining plates and bowls or anything else. Others can do the same. Karen can't sabotage all of us at once. Still, they had to consider the HOA rules. Technically, a yard sale more than 4 times a year could be a violation, unless it was somehow categorized differently. Martin suggested calling it a community flea market and swap meet, perhaps partnering with a local charity. We could approach Mr. Morales for official HOA recognition, he said. If the board endorses it, Karen's out of luck. The group agreed to try. Harriet volunteered to draft a proposal. Martin, who had some connections on the board, would arrange a meeting. Evelyn, though still shaken, felt a spark of hope. The neighbors' support was empowering. She recalled how powerless she'd felt when Karen flung her items out the window, but now the entire community rallied behind her. A special HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday to discuss the community flea market and swap meet proposal. Karen, still lying low, hadn't been attending typical HOA events since the Crockery incident. Some speculated she knew a storm of criticism awaited her. Mr. Morales opened the meeting with routine business, budgets, landscaping contracts, then invited Harriet to present the flea market concept. Harriet described a vision. Each Saturday morning, residents would set up tables in their driveways or front yards, focusing on used items, crafts, or produce. Shoppers from around the area might come, but the event would end by mid-afternoon, controlling noise and traffic. A small portion of proceeds from participating families could be donated to a local nonprofit, further legitimizing the activity. One board member asked, "Doesn't the HOA rule limit yard sales to 4 times a year?" Harriet responded that these wouldn't be yard sales by an individual homeowner, but a shared community event sponsored by the HOA. She also noted that many neighborhoods have weekly farmers markets or craft fairs, which are not subject to the same restrictions as private yard sales. Mr. Morales nodded slowly. We do have to ensure no city ordinances are violated. Parking, noise, signage. But I like the idea of bringing neighbors together. It might improve community spirit. Another board member, Ms. Leonard, added, and if it's an official HOA event, we can set guidelines for participants. Hours, signage style, areas for parking. That ensures it stays organized. The motion passed with the board's majority support. They agreed on a pilot program, a weekly community flea market each Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. for 2 months. If it went well, they'd consider extending it. Harriet, Martin, and Evelyn left the meeting feeling triumphant. The only conspicuous absence was Karen, who had presumably chosen not to attend. The HOA posted an official announcement on Meadowfield Ridge's website and on community bulletin boards. Meadowfield Ridge Community Flea Market. Starting this Saturday, 8 a.m., 2 p.m. Residents are invited to sell or swap household goods, crafts, produce, etc. All proceeds remain with sellers. Optional donation to local charity. Help us build a vibrant, neighborly event. The response was electric. Families who previously dreaded Karen's intimidation felt a surge of freedom. Several people who'd never considered hosting a yard sale now saw an opportunity to declutter or showcase homemade crafts. Others planned to donate a portion of profits to the local food bank, adding a philanthropic angle. Evelyn, in particular, received an outpouring of support. Neighbors recognized the flea market concept was largely sparked by the horrific act Karen committed. Some whispered jokes like Karen created the monster she feared, though they tried to keep bitterness from overshadowing the positivity. Meanwhile, in the days leading up to the first flea market, Karen was seen only rarely. She might pace at the edge of her yard, glaring at neighbors, or scurry into her car without making eye contact. People wondered if she'd try another sabotage, but with so many participants, it seemed less likely. Attempting to disrupt multiple households at once would draw immediate police response. Saturday came with mild sunshine and a gentle breeze. Driveways across Meadowfield Ridge transformed into mini market stalls. Some residents put out folding tables with old books, DVDs, clothing, or kids' toys. Others displayed homemade crafts, knitted blankets, jewelry, crocheted plushies. A few older couples set up small stands with fresh produce from backyard gardens. Evelyn's driveway became a focal point, with a fresh banner reading Evelyn's Vintage Finds above the table. She laid out her remaining crockery, some chipped but still charming, and a handful of gently used household gadgets. Harriet and Martin helped set up extra chairs for potential buyers. A donation jar for the local food bank sat near the cashier's box. By 9 a.m., throngs of visitors bustled along the sidewalks. Families from nearby neighborhoods heard about the event on social media. A lively energy filled Meadowfield Ridge. Children ran around excitedly. Couples strolled from table to table, and the aroma of fresh-baked pastries drifted from someone's stand. In the middle of it all stood Evelyn, a serene smile on her face. She sold bowls and plates to eager collectors, delighted to recoup more money than she'd ever hoped for. Some people recognized her from the rumor of the thrown crockery and offered extra sympathy, sometimes paying more than the sticker price just to support her. She felt tears threaten to form at the corners of her eyes, touched by their kindness. Karen was nowhere in sight. As the community flea market continued weekly, Meadowfield Ridge experienced a remarkable shift in atmosphere. Once quiet and somewhat tense, thanks to Karen's constant watch, the neighborhood now buzzed with anticipation for Saturdays. People started planning potluck lunches alongside the market. A handful of musicians even arranged acoustic performances on a neighbor's front porch, adding a festival vibe. Local press took note. The city's small newspaper ran a feature titled Suburban HOA Transforms Dispute into Weekly Market, praising how adversity had led to a positive outcome. Photos showed smiling residents with tables of goods, families strolling, and a beaming Evelyn holding up a vintage plate. Financially, Evelyn began to recover from the loss of her shattered crockery, though she still winced at the memory of what Karen did. She found herself selling more items than she'd initially intended. Some old quilts, vintage table linens, and decorative figurines. The influx of modest profits allowed her to fix the roof and the water heater. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward her neighbors and the wave of community spirit that had emerged. At the next official HOA meeting, Mr. Morales presented data on the flea market's impact. Participation was high, visitor feedback was positive, and there were no major complaints about noise or traffic. A portion of proceeds went to a local charity each week, boosting the community's reputation. The board voted to extend the flea market through the rest of the summer, possibly into fall if weather allowed. They even considered installing a few permanent signposts at the entrances to Meadowfield Ridge, advertising the event on Saturdays. It was a far cry from Karen's vision of a spotless, child-free, strictly uniform neighborhood. Instead, a sense of vibrancy and unity had taken root. While neighbors were overjoyed, a question lingered. What about Karen? She'd been absent from these meetings, and though rumors of a police investigation persisted, no one had seen her face formal charges. Evelyn had decided, after much soul-searching, not to press charges. Her focus was on moving forward. The police had the incident on file, and if Karen tried anything again, they'd have grounds to pursue legal action. One breezy Saturday morning, several weeks into the successful flea market run, Karen appeared on the sidewalk. A wave of tension rippled through those who spotted her. She wore dark sunglasses and carried a small notebook as she walked from stall to stall. Many expected some sort of confrontation. However, Karen said little. She simply observed, scribbling occasional notes. When she reached Evelyn's table, the two women locked eyes. Evelyn mustered a courteous nod, but said nothing more. The memory of that violent morning still stung, but she refused to let Karen's presence ruin her good mood. Karen lingered for a moment. A handful of passers-by glared at her, protective of Evelyn. Finally, Karen turned and left without a word. Some whispered that she might be trying to find a new angle for a complaint, but days passed with no sign of any letter or email from her. It seemed she was at a loss, overshadowed by the communal endorsement of the event. As summer progressed, the Meadowfield Ridge Community Flea Market turned into a local phenomenon. Nearby neighborhoods sent visitors, some hoping to find unique trinkets, others enjoying the social atmosphere. Parents set up stands of homemade cookies or lemonade, kids ran small businesses under adult supervision, and the local charity placed donation jars at each driveway, reaping hundreds of dollars each weekend. Evelyn, who had once only aimed to sell a few boxes of old plates, now found herself at the heart of a flourishing community tradition. She added homemade jams to her table, using berries from her backyard garden. She built new friendships with neighbors she'd barely known, bonding over shared experiences and newfound camaraderie. Though Karen's sabotage had initially traumatized her, Evelyn felt stronger than ever. Each Saturday, she was reminded that the neighborhood supported her. In a twist of irony, Karen's aggression had birthed something beautiful and unifying. Amid the success of the flea market, rumors swirled that Karen was under internal review by the HOA board, cited for trespassing, property damage, and abuse of authority. Without a formal police charge, the board couldn't remove her from the community, but they could, and did, strip her of her position as compliance representative. In a statement posted to the HOA website, Mr. Morales emphasized the board's commitment to respectful enforcement of rules and the safety of all residents. He alluded to recent complaints about an individual's conduct. Everyone knew it meant Karen. She was effectively sidelined from decision-making roles. Karen's once frequent patrols ceased. Neighbors rarely saw her. Some speculated she might move away, ashamed or resentful. Others shrugged, not caring as long as her meddling ended. The vibe in Meadowfield Ridge improved markedly, free from the anxious hush that used to settle whenever Karen was spotted. Evelyn, while never receiving a direct apology from Karen, found comfort in the knowledge that justice, in some sense, had been done. The woman who'd called her a clumsy hoarder had inadvertently brought forth a thriving market that displayed the neighborhood's heart and soul. In every sense, the tide had turned. A few weeks later, Evelyn was pruning her roses one early evening when she noticed Karen standing at the edge of her driveway. The older woman inhaled, bracing herself for confrontation. Karen approached hesitantly, hands clasped. "I came to," Karen started, then paused. She looked around, as if worried neighbors were watching. "I came to see if you needed me to cover any damages." Evelyn's heart fluttered with mixed emotions. She searched Karen's eyes for sincerity. "That's kind of you," she said slowly, "but I've managed. The community flea market helped a great deal. Still, it doesn't erase what you did." Karen swallowed hard. "I know. I lost my temper. I truly believed I was protecting the neighborhood." Her voice wavered, revealing a hint of uncertainty or guilt. "I'm sorry, though I know that might not fix anything now." For a moment, Evelyn stared, memories of that morning flashing in her mind. The crash of pottery, her fear and anger. She exhaled. "Well, we're moving forward," she said gently. "I hope you find some peace too." Karen nodded curtly, as if unsure how to continue. She turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing by her roses, heart pounding. It wasn't exactly a warm reconciliation, but it was the closest Karen had come to an apology. Perhaps it was enough to let Evelyn finally close that chapter. Over the following months, the flea market remained a staple of Meadowfield Ridge life. Even when fall's chill arrived, families put up canopies and continued to sell and swap goods. The sense of unity that sprang from adversity never faded. Neighbors helped each other in ways beyond just commerce, carpooling, volunteering for yard work, or checking on elderly residents. For Evelyn, her yard brimming with roses and her new water heater humming quietly, life felt renewed. The heartbreak of seeing her crockery shattered was replaced by the joy of forging stronger bonds with those around her. She still had a few precious sets of plates left, though she had decided never to sell, even if they collected dust. But each time she gazed at them, she smiled, reminded of her resilience. Karen's name became a hushed footnote in the story. People sometimes refer to her as the woman who threw crockery out a window, shaking their heads at the memory. Yet in a paradoxical way, Karen's destructive act had lit a spark that transformed Meadowfield Ridge. What began as a single yard sale for a senior citizen's extra plates evolved into a flourishing, weekly community flea market, with the HOA's blessing, where residents thrived and relationships flourished. Had Karen not hurled that box of dishes, Meadowfield Ridge might have remained a place of polite but distant residents, each living behind pristine facades. Instead, it became a community in the fullest sense, where a day of shared laughter, commerce, and conversation replaced the hushed fear of petty infractions. On Saturday mornings, now, visitors from nearby neighborhoods parked on Rosemary Drive, excited to discover vintage treasures, homemade pies, or secondhand children's bikes. They strolled from driveway to driveway under fluttering banners, exchanging stories with friendly residents. And if someone happened to ask, "How did all this start?" the locals would smile at each other knowingly, answering, "It started when a neighbor tried to destroy a yard sale, ended up giving us a reason to come together instead." With that, the legend of Karen's mania and Evelyn's resilience became woven into Meadowfield Ridge's collective memory, symbolizing how even an act of malicious sabotage can inadvertently sow the seeds of a beautiful, shared triumph.